Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a highly specific pediatric homeopathic profile, the very complex and honestly quite striking remedy known as Sina. If you've spent any time at all studying pediatric cases, you already know that finding the exact right match requires you to pay attention to the absolute smallest, most peculiar details. And Sina, well, it's pretty much full of them. Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll meet the Sina child. Then, we'll look at their face, nose, and physical tics. After that, we'll get into hunger, sleep, and worms, check out the spasmodic Sina cough, and wrap things up with some key remedy relations and comparisons. Let's get right into it.
All right, part 1. Let's meet the Sina child and establish their psychological baseline.
So think about this for a second. What do you do with a kid who desperately wants to be carried, but actively hates being touched? It's quite the paradox, right? But it perfectly captures the intense, unappeasable state of a child who needs Sina. You're basically caught in this endless lose-lose situation.
Our sources point out that this remedy is especially adapted for children with dark hair. Psychologically speaking, these kids are incredibly cross, irritable, and just plain ill-humored. They'll vehemently demand a bunch of different things, but the second you actually offer them, they reject them completely. When you see this kind of behavior, you might also want to compare it to remedies like Antimonium tartaricum, Bryonia, Chamomilla, or Staphysagria.
But the really crucial point here is how they react to comfort. They are actively averse to caresses. They literally cannot bear for you to even come near them. And here is your major clinical red flag. They want to be carried. But unlike other profiles, picking them up gives them absolutely zero relief from their irritability.
Moving right along to part 2, face, nose, and physical tics. These are your visual hallmarks.
When you look at their face, you're going to notice a sickly pale, almost whitish complexion with a distinct bluish appearance around the mouth and dark rings under the eyes. But the absolute most unique hallmark? It's an asymmetry. Exactly one cheek will be red, while the other remains totally pale. And by the way, that's a symptom you should definitely cross-reference with Chamomilla. Then we've got the physical tics. There's this intense itching that makes the child constantly dig and bore at their nose. They pick it all the time. You might even see them rubbing it frantically against a pillow or just grinding it right into the shoulder of an exhausted nurse. For this specific symptom, Marum verum is a really strong clinical comparison.
Okay, part 3, hunger, sleep, and worms. This is where we look at the internal turmoil.
Let's talk digestion. The Sina child has what our sources actually refer to as a canine hunger. They're ravenously hungry right after finishing a completely full meal. They crave sweets and all kinds of different things. Yet in a really stark contradiction, an infant needing this remedy will flat out refuse their mother's milk.
This whole systemic disruption also shows up involuntarily in their urinary tract, and the presentation is super unusual. The urine is white and turbid when it's passed, but strangely enough, it turns milky and even semi-solid after it stands for a little while.
And their sleep? Just as chaotic. It's marked by this pitiful weeping when they're awake and sudden starts and screaming during sleep. You'll also hear a very distinct grinding of the teeth, which should make you think of cicuta or sulfur too. All of this intense agitation is actually closely linked to suffering from worms, specifically ascarides, which prompts another comparison back to Marum verum.
Next up, part 4, the spasmodic Sina cough and those respiratory reflexes.
The respiratory symptoms here progress in a very specific way. It usually starts as a dry cough, accompanied by sneezing. Then, it transitions into this spasmodic gagging, especially in the morning. And finally, this cough is periodic, meaning it reliably comes back every spring and fall. Now, this cough is so severe and so easily triggered that it profoundly impacts the kid's behavior. They become afraid to even speak or move out of sheer terror that doing so will bring on a violent coughing fit. That's a hallmark that very strongly mirrors Bryonia. Finally, part 5, remedy relations and comparisons. Let's look at the master key for this profile.
Our sources give us some really clear roadmaps here. For extreme irritability, you want to compare Sina to Antimonium crudum, Antimonium tartarium, Bryonia, Chamomilla, Creosotum, Silicia, or Staphysagria. In cases of pertussis, Sina is highly indicated right after Drosera has relieved the severe symptoms. For aphonia caused by exposure, Sina actually cures when aconite, phosphorus, and spongia have failed. And for worm affections, if Sina seems indicated but just isn't working, santonine sometimes does the trick, though you should also evaluate Marum verum and Spigilia.
It is also absolutely vital to know that Cinna is frequently thought of as a major epidemic remedy specifically for children. So during an outbreak, you might find that all the kids present with a specific Cinna profile, while the adults who are caught in the exact same epidemic require an entirely different drugs. And this brings us to one of the most famous clinical distinctions. The ultimate difference between the highly irritable Cinna child and the very similar Chemomylia child comes down to being carried. They both demand to be picked up, right? But the Chemomylia child is actually relieved by it. For the intensely cross Cinna child, carrying provides literally zero comfort.
So, putting it all together, knowing these oddities, from the one red cheek and that strange, milky, semi-solid urine to the canine hunger and complete aversion to touch, it gives us a profile that is undeniably complex, yet incredibly specific. So the next time a frantic, unappeasable child is brought into your practice, will you get distracted by the chaos? Or will you immediately spot the distinct...
Thanks for watching Visual Homeopathy. If you found this helpful, please like, share, and comment. Subscribe and press the bell icon for more homeopathy remedy